All right. We are live for a Q&A session out there. So I'm going to go through the top questions that I got this week, and we're going to go over 8 questions. And if you're watching this, you can chime in. And if you have a question, feel free to ask a question down there in the comments. And we'll just walk these questions, and hopefully you get some value out of this. Okay, so the first question that we have here is on leaky brain. And how do you determine if you have a leaky brain? So you can actually do some testing on that if you want. Your brain has a barrier, just like your gut has a barrier, your brain has a barrier. Now, when it comes to your gut is, so when I say your gut, I'm talking about your small intestine. Now, your small intestine is only one cell thick. So what keeps the outside from the inside is literally only one cell thick. And this is why the gut is so critical. Now, when God designed us, He designed our gut barrier and our brain barrier to be almost identical. So you can assume that if you have leaky gut, you're also going to have leaky brain. Now, the blood-brain barrier is literally only one cell thick as well. And that can become very damaged over a period of time. If you have chronic inflammation, that can damage the blood-brain barrier. If you have any kind of leaky gut problems, if you have GI issues. So here's what I tell my clients, is this is what normal should be. Normal is 2 to 3 bowel movements every single day, no gas, no bloating, no diarrhea. If you have something than that, you probably have a leaky gut, and you can assume that if you have leaky gut, you probably have leaky brain as well. So there's a lot of different tests that you can do. There are specific tests that you can do on through Cyrix Labs. They have a variety of different tests that you can do. And these are actually checking to see if you have any kind of autoimmune disease against the blood-brain barrier. This is what kind of determines if you have a leaky brain, is if you have an autoimmune disease against your blood-brain barrier. So I've ran lots and lots of these tests. And generally speaking, if I go into a case thinking that they have a blood-brain barrier problem, then they probably do have a blood-brain barrier problem. So there's a variety of different tests that you can actually run out there through Cyrix Labs. You can do more complex labs. You can do really simple labs. There's also a panel GI map test, which is a sample test, a poop test. And that can check for a marker called zonulin. So what the heck is zonulin? So zonulin is literally the cell. So you have 2 cells, and then you have like mortar between each cell. So what zonulin is actually the mortar between 2 cells. So you have 2 cells here, and then you have the mortar or the cement. So what the GI map test can run is to see if any of this mortar right here or the cement is in your bloodstream. And if it's in your bloodstream, then you would have an autoimmune disease against your gut. Now, how does this correlate to leaky brain? That if that comes back positive, you have a positive zonulin marker, that would indicate that you highly probable that you have a leaky brain as well. Now, if you've had any concussions at all, you have a leaky brain. Now, when I talk about concussions, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll ask them, well, have you ever had any concussions? And most people, 90% of people say no. And then I say, okay, well, let's take a step back. Have you ever played any sports? Have you ever had your bell rung? Have you ever been in a motor vehicle accident where you got your head flung forward and back? These are all concussions. These are all things that can lead to leaky brain. So when I say concussion, it doesn't mean that you need to be completely cold, and that what I mean cold is knocked out cold, right? So that's not really necessary for you to have a concussion. It's kind of like the NFL players. These concussion protocols are taken very, very seriously now. Why? Because these NFL players are like dying. The average age is like 55, because repeated trauma, brain trauma, over a period of time can cause a trauma, can cause concussions, and this can cause leaky brain, and this can cause your your brain to be inflamed. So if you've had any concussions, had your bell rung, if you have constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas, that probably is going to indicate that you have some kind of leaky brain or you have some autoimmune disease against your blood-brain barrier. Kind of same concept. Now, two, if you have like brain fog or brain fatigue, these are classic signs that you have a leaky brain as well. So those are some basic general guidelines. If you have any questions out there and you want some questions answered, just list them in the comment and I'll try and go over those. We're going over basically 8 questions that I got this past week on my videos. And the first one was, how do I determine if I have a leaky brain? So if you have any questions about leaky brain, feel free to chime in on that. The next thing here is I got a question on white blood cell count. Now, when you look at your white blood cell count, you can go and you can just get a standard white blood cell count. And the range for that is like 3 to, it just depends, like 3.5 to 11. Now, the sweet spot where I like to see white blood cell count is between 5 and 6. So this is a sweet spot. So if you've had any blood work to check for your white blood cell count, you might want to pull this up or write this number down. Is when you see your white blood cell count, you want to see that between 5 or 6. Now, why is that so critical? Because that's where your immune system isn't revved up. Your immune system is kind of like in a neutral position between a white blood cell count between 5 and 6. Now, if I see white blood cell count, like let's say 7.5, I don't like that number at all. This really indicates that there is a possibility of a low-grade chronic systemic infection. I can't tell you how many times I've ran labs on clients and their white blood cell count is 7.5, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 9, and it's never really looked at because it's not lab high. It's not over 11. So over 11 tells you that you have a pretty significant infection. But if it's sitting around 7.5, 8, these are all indications that you could have a low-grade systemic infection. Now, on the other side is it could be lab low. Let's say it's like 3.3. Now that's lab low, so it's lab low. So in my viewpoint, what I've seen clinically over 26 years is when it's low, it means that your immune system is really starting to get beaten up, meaning that you could have small bacterial overgrowth, you could have a low-grade chronic infection that's been there for a long time, and then that started to basically wear down your immune system. So that's what can happen when you have low white blood cell count of 3.3 is you could have a low-grade systemic infection for a long period of time where the immune system has actually gotten worse, and then you show the low white blood cell count. Now, on the reverse side of that, what I was just talking about is white blood cell count of 7.5. That could be, you could still have a chronic systemic infection for a long period of time, but your immune system has been able to be revved up for a long period of time and have that white blood cell count to 7.5, where someone else, maybe they had their white blood cell count at 7.5 revved up for a long time, and then it started to crash, their white blood cells started to crash, and then it went down to 3.3 or 3.1 or even the high 2. So this is significant. Now, another marker that's on the white blood cell count is eosinophils. Now, eosinophils, I'm just going to pull some labs up right here. So eosinophils is a very, very small portion of your white blood cell count. So on here, on LabCorp that I run, eosinophils is 0. So this is normal, 0 to 0.4. Now, if you have 1 or 2 or 3, this is a really classic sign that you can have some kind of like bugs, worms, parasites in your gut that's causing your gut to be inflamed. So you really want to look closely at your eosinophils because there could be a possibility that you have some kind of infection in your gut. And infections in the gut are very, very common. A lot of people have infections and they're just there brewing, and every time you eat, you get bloating, you get gas. And one thing with these infections, small bacterial overgrowth, or could just be some kind of like worms or bugs or bacteria, is they produce gas, right? So they produce ammonia. So sometimes when you eat, your stomach will get really bloated because it's the off gas that the basically bugs are producing and causing a bunch of toxic things to occur in your gut. All right, next question that we got here is number 3. I've been getting a lot of questions on methylene blue. And methylene blue, I don't use methylene blue as my go-to product. It's never a go-to product. When I look at clients, when they come to me, if they have fibromyalgia, if they've been hurt by antibiotics, or they have GI issues, I never start with methylene blue. Methylene blue right now on the internet is it's like a kind of a sexy new kind of product out there. So there's a lot of interest in methylene blue. Methylene blue has been around for, I want to say around 120 years. And there's been lots and lots of research on methylene blue and how that helps mitochondria, how it helps you produce more energy through ATP, right? Your powerhouse of your cells. And there's also too, when methylene blue first came to the market, over 100 plus years ago, it was used to actually kill bacteria. So there's been a lot of research on methylene blue and how methylene blue can actually kill bacteria, which is, that's where I kind of use it, is if someone has, especially men or women, that have chronic UTIs. Now, I just want to preface this. I never start with methylene blue. If someone has chronic urinary tract infections, there's a lot of different things that you need to go through before you'd actually recommend any kind of methylene blue. Is you need to rule out all these different factors. So, what would some of these factors be? Some of the low-hanging fruit factors would be that. This is in particular to women, is that they have some kind of food sensitivities. Like they're sensitive to gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, and they're eating these products every single day. And this is causing problems with food sensitivities and causing the bugs to grow because they have sensitivities, they have a weak immune system, and then these bugs, they just kind of eat up that fuel and they just propagate. So that's a big one. Another big one that I see for women and men is when they have high sugar levels. And I have a whole protocol on how you'd want to check your sugar levels. But your sugar levels, I like to see sugar levels between 85 and 120 with or without food. That's what I like to see. So I have a protocol where people can actually check this at home. It's very, very simple. But if you have sugar that's too low or too high, let's say you eat a meal and your blood sugar shoots up to 150, which is not normal. I would say it's not where you want to have the sweet spot, right? We're talking about the sweet spot. So that's not where the sweet spot should really be, is 150. So then what you want to do is you want to try to handle your sugar levels. You want to get these sugar levels between 85 and 120. And at the end of the day, the bacteria eat, right? They eat the sugar and they feed on that. So if you have chronic urinary tract infections, you definitely want to make sure that your sugars are in the sweet spot. 85 to 120, because the bugs and the UTIs, they literally will eat that stuff for snacks and people will not get better. Another common thing that I see with urinary tract infections is that, this is more for women, is they don't have enough iron. Now, when you see like an iron pattern, like this would be low and this is high right here, you don't want to be down at the low range. Like I tell a lot of my clients is, you could have what I call subclinical anemia. So what the heck does that mean? That means that your anemia, you can't be diagnosed with anemia, but you don't have really robust iron status. Meaning that your iron levels are on the lower end of normal, and you don't want your iron status to be on the lower end of normal. And what the heck does iron do? Iron will actually deliver oxygen to the tissues. So if you don't have enough iron, you can't have enough oxygen, and we're talking about women that have UTIs right now. So if they have suboptimal iron function, then if they have suboptimal iron function, they can't actually get good oxygen to the tissue, to that tissue down there, and that can cause chronic systemic UTIs for women. So high blood sugar is number one that you want to rule out. The second thing you want to rule out is any what I call subclinical anemia. And what I find clinically is a lot of women will have like brain fog, brain fatigue, fibromyalgia, and they will have subclinic anemia. I just had a question here. Do you take iron supplements every day or every other day? I mean, I really can't answer that question. You don't want. Here's what I can tell you. You don't want to take iron supplements randomly. Like you need to have a test. You need to have it tested to make sure that you actually need iron, right? So I very rarely give iron. And let me just kind of explain why. So first of all, before you take iron, you want to make sure that you do the right testing. So you want to check, for example, ferritin is a really critical marker that you want to check. The majority of women to me never have had a ferritin check. You want to check your saturation. You want to check your hemoglobin, your red blood cells, your hematocrit, MCV, MCH. So there's a whole bunch of series that you want to check before you start taking iron. And this is why, because if you're not actually subclinical anemia and you have these infections, bacterial infections, they eat iron. They eat iron for nutrition, right? So you could actually be feeding the bacteria thinking that you're actually doing good, taking an iron supplement, and you're really not. So I have given iron for sure, but it's never the first thing that I go to. If I see someone that has subclinical anemia, then I'm looking at like what's happening with the gut. Are they able to break down iron? Can they break down proteins? Are they even eating enough protein? To be honest with you, most women that come to me that have a chronic illness are not eating enough protein. So this is what I strive for. So whatever your ideal weight is. So let's say your ideal weight is 130 pounds. You're a female. It's 125. Your ideal weight is 125. But let's say you weigh 150, but your ideal weight is 125. You want to eat 125 grams of protein every single day. So generally speaking, women just are not eating enough protein. Even men are not eating enough protein. You have to really, really be conscious about the food that you eat and making sure that you're getting enough iron in your body. So now, let's say you are eating protein, and you're eating enough protein, and chicken really doesn't count, right? Chicken really isn't a source for iron. It's red meat. So then the next question I'm looking at, well, okay, are you eating enough protein? Do you have enough hydrochloric acid in your stomach? So when God designed us, He designed our stomach with cells. They're called parietal cells that actually produce hydrochloric acid that can break down nutrients. So then the next thing is, well, let's get your gut well. If you have any bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, you want to handle that first because that tells you right away that you have a bad gut. Then if you handle that, and there's a variety of ways that you can handle that, then you want to make sure that there's enough hydrochloric acid. And if there's enough hydrochloric acid and then they start eating more protein, red meat, then you want to recheck these lab markers. You want to check iron. So I never, ever give iron right out of the bat because it's not good. It's just not good clinical practice. So I hope that helped Allison here. She's got another question here. So I've heard that about a bacteria eating iron. That's interesting. I was anemic, but I take liquid every day. But I don't know. I should have my ferritin was low before, but rethinking this, I do eat more protein now. I had a steak. Okay, so I answered your question. So I never just go for here's iron. You have to do a thorough investigation. Okay, so if you have any more questions on that, Allison, feel free to ask. I'm going to go on to the next question that we had. I had a bunch of questions on neuropathy. There's a lot of people out there that are suffering from neuropathy. Neuropathy could be on the feet, could be on the hands. And one of the videos that I talked about is a homocysteine level. Now, homocysteine is a marker for, it can be a marker for B12. Now, homocysteine, the range is like 3 to 14. I like to see the sweet spot between 5 and 6. That's the sweet spot. Now, people can have an MTHFR genetic SNP. That means that they're not able to absorb B12. And a lot of times people will go to the conventional system and they'll have their B12 checked. They'll have their B12 checked and it will come back high. And then the provider will tell them, oh my goodness, your B12 is high. Stop taking B12 supplements. This is very, very, very common. So that B12 test is only good. Let me just state that again. It's only good to check for low B12. If you have high B12, you've pinned the needle. I think the pinning the needle on my LabCorp is 2000. So some people need to have massive amounts of B12 because they literally cannot absorb B12. And when I say they can't absorb it, their ability to absorb B12 is hindered because of the MTHFR genetic SNP. That could be one thing, right? Second thing could be that they have food sensitivities to gluten, soy, dairy, and they're eating these every day, and their stomach's inflamed, and then their parietal cells don't produce enough hydrochloric acid. So you can see how this just kind of snowballs out of the way. So for example, me, I have an MTHFR genetic SNP, and my homocysteine runs around 12. So I need to be very, very conscious about the amount of B12 that I take. So I take a B12 complex. In the morning, I take 2 capsules, and then at night, I take a very specific B12 to bring down my homocysteine. So homocysteine is very, very dangerous. That will cause neuropathy. That will cause brain fog, brain fatigue. That will cause your body to be completely inflamed. So you definitely want to manage homocysteine, and if it's 14, this is really bad. You want to do the sweet spot between 5 and 6. So that's the critical spot for homocysteine. So, okay. The next question we had on the videos this week was a question on glycemic index. Now, first of all, what the heck is glycemic index? Glycemic index is how quickly you eat a food and how quickly that food is broken down and spikes your insulin levels. So we want to avoid foods that have a high glycemic index. So things that have a high glycemic index would be such things as like rice. Rice has a very, very high glycemic index. So if you eat rice, if you eat a bowl of white rice, that's going to shoot up your sugar levels. It's going to shoot up your insulin levels, and this is going to cause you to be and you're going to be inflamed. You're going to be in a state of a chronic inflammation. So the glycemic index is how quickly a food breaks down. You can just Google this. You can Google glycemic indexes. If anyone has a question, feel free to comment, and I'll try and answer your questions. We're going over the top basically 8 questions I got this week or this past week on my videos, and right now we're talking about glycemic index. Now, so the glycemic index, you want to start, just Google it. Just Google glycemic index and see what you're eating. So for example, like people think like oatmeal and orange juice is really healthy, right? So that would be a healthy meal. So that is, let me just go in here. Let's look at someone post a question here. So oatmeal it's all carbs, right? So oatmeal over a long period of time is really, so I never eat oatmeal. Oatmeal is like a treat because that has all carbs, and that will severely or quickly spike your sugar and insulin levels. So you can just Google, oatmeal, and two, it's really rich. It's really a high dense carbohydrate. So when you eat any kind of meals, you want to make sure that you're eating, for example, a fat and a protein. Now, wheat bread has a very, very high glycemic index, and from this, the glycemic index goes from 0 to 100. And I think wheat bread has a glycemic index of like 76. I think rice has a glycemic index of like 95 or something like that, super, super high. Now, check out this. If you eat a Snickers bar, the glycemic index of a Snickers bar is like 50. So you have a Snickers bar, which is 50, and then you have wheat bread, which is higher than the Snickers bar. And the reason why that is because that doesn't tell you that you should just go eat Snickers, right? That's because the Snicker bar has fat in it, it has peanuts in it, right? And that lowers the glycemic index. So one of the things I've been really conscious about is just getting people on what I would call a carnivore-ish lifestyle. So I think clinically, this is where I've seen the best results with my clients. But you got to refine this, is where they're eating protein and they're eating fruit, not not vegetables. Actually, I find that vegetables are very detrimental. Vegetables can have a lot of like poisons in them, and these poisons, there's a variety of different poisons in them, but one of them is called the isothiocyanates, which can really cause gut problems on someone's gut. Yeah, okay, so someone here, so you want to stay tuned for this. I have an awful gut. Doctor suggested, I'm not sure what this is, Quenda every day. I'm not sure. Quenda, it's a fiber, I'd imagine, right? So this is horrible. This is not good. In the questions here, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just put vegetables. So I'm going to go to my website here, and if you want more information on this, I've done a great webinar on vegetables. Vegetables are literally poison. Like since I've here we go. Since I've pulled people off of vegetables, people have gotten better. So vegetables are not healthy for every human being. You have to realize vegetables survive this long because they produce poisons. Right? Vegetables don't move, so they produce poisons. Here, I'm going to share this link with you right here. Okay, you want to check iron. So I never, ever give... Hang on a second. Right out of the... Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to send this. Maybe I can just comment right here. Or I'm just going to put this in the comments. Okay, so you can see that the dark side of vegetables. So I've had the sickest people come to me, and they think that they're eating healthy, and they're eating healthy because that's what the conventional system says. If you go out there right now and they're going to tell you, you go to any quote conventional, even functional medicine doctors, I think get this wrong, is they're going to tell you what's the healthiest thing that you can eat? Vegetables, vegetables, vegetables. So I have people coming to me that are sicker than a dog, and they're eating no protein, and they're loading up. So here's what they eat. They eat tons of vegetables, and they eat chicken. That's what they eat. And these people are the sickest of the sick. Why? Because these vegetables for that individual person are toxic. So if you go into that podcast there, that blog, watch that video, and I have all the research there. There's other great resources on YouTube. But once you take people off of vegetables and replace it with fruit, and a certain type of fruit, depending on how bad your gut is. Now, I'm not going to say a blanket statement that no one can eat vegetables. That wouldn't be the truth. Now, for me, I've been carnivore-ish here since January of 2024, so 14 months. So if I eat vegetables, I consider that to be a treat. I used to have big salads every single day. I had some gut problems, just some bloating in my gut, and it was not very fun, right? And then basically I've eliminated all vegetables. I eat meat, fruits. That's what I primarily try and eat, and my gut is 1,000 times better. So with the glycemic index, fruit, meat is low on the glycemic index. We started talking about glycemic index. So meat has a glycemic index of like 1 or 2. Avocados has a glycemic index of 1 or 2. You're going to see, more fruit that has more fiber, like apples would have a lower glycemic index, but you just cannot go off of the glycemic index. That's not the only thing that you want to go over. You want to look at the person, right? So when people come to me, you have to look at them as a human being and see where their weak links are, and try and manage them and help them as best as possible. Okay, so is red meat recommended? Yes, I recommend red meat. So if you have any other questions, if anyone else is listening, feel free to chat in the comment right there. We're going to go over, I have another question here, is chronic infections. Okay, this had to do with H. pylori. So I had a question on H. pylori. Here's my thoughts on H. pylori. I do go after H. pylori, but I go after H. pylori after I've done all the basic fundamental 101 functional medicine things. So I never when someone comes to me as a client, I never go after like one little thing, like the conventional medical system. You go after, like, let's say someone has a thyroid condition. They're only focused on the thyroid. Like when someone comes to me, I'm looking at them, like, where's your physiology weak? Where's your physiology weak? I believe that God created us to be well. So where is that healing power weak in your body, and what can we do to increase that God-given healing ability to heal and function? And then when you do that, then your body can handle H. pylori. Then your body can handle these infections. So the very first thing that I do is if someone has H. pylori, is we got to look at their gut. Do they have constipation? Do they have diarrhea? Do they have bloating? Do they have any food sensitivities? Are they eating wheat, dairy, or soy? So you want to kind of wean these people off of these things and then start from there. And let's say someone has constipation, diarrhea, their gut's a wreck. If you just go after the gut and the gut gets better, you're just going to handle the H. pylori. Now, what I found too is, and this is in the research as well, is when people have when people have H. pylori, the H. pylori can burrow into your stomach and affect your parietal cells, which produce the hydrochloric acid. So what I've seen clinically is when people have H. pylori, they're actually not producing, the H. pylori got into the cells and it stopped their parietal cells, which are the cells that produce hydrochloric acid, from producing any HCl. So then the H. pylori can live in their gut, and it can just get worse and worse and worse. So HCl is a really important thing for chronic infections if you have H. pylori as well. Okay, and then the last question right here is we're going to go over a mold question. And this question here, I run mold test, and I don't start with mold test right away. So what I want to do is when I work with a client is I want to start with the basics. So I start with a great set of blood work, 11, 12 vials of blood. And then from there, we start working on a functional medicine program, like a one-on-one functional medicine program where we're actually trying to get to the root cause of the problem. Now, after 6 to 8 weeks, if there is no progress, right, if we didn't move the needle at all, then I know with 100% certainty that something is hindering that person's body to heal and function. So this is when we start to do mold testing. And mold testing is very critical because it can isolate a possibility or a cause where it was never known before. Right? So a lot of people are living in mold, have no idea that they're living in mold, and then when you do the test, all the stuff on the mold is crazy, crazy high. So the first thing you have to do is if you are in a mold building, a place that currently has active mold, you really need to get out of that house because the mold is very toxic, very, very toxic. Now, what I've seen when it comes to mold, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comment and we'll try and answer your question. So we're going over the top, basically 8 questions of the day. So what I find with mold is people can have mold exposure from decades ago. The mold can still be in their body. And then what happens is they can take some, for example, antibiotics, right? So they can take some like fluoroquinolones or Bactrim or whatever it is, and that antibiotic wakes up the mold. Because what happens is you can have mold in your body and it can be dormant and be fine. Mold's a problem is you can have the mold in there, but then when it starts producing its pollen, its mold spores, that's the very toxic substance of mold. And what I found is when people are taking antibiotics, if they've had a mold exposure, that gets in there and it wakes up the mold. And the mold's like, OMG, like I'm being attacked. This bacteria, the antibiotics is trying to kill me. So then it starts producing the mold spores. And then when it produces the mold spores, this is when someone gets very, very sick because now the mold is actively producing its spores. Just like in the spring, when the trees pollinate, that's like their offspring, right? So when it comes to the mold spores, that's the same thing. That's where all the chemicals are, and the neurotoxins are in the spores. So what I find clinically, again, is the antibiotics will really cause the mold, if you have mold in your body, to start producing mold spores. So the first thing is if you have mold in your house, you want to check that. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can go to Menards, Lowe's, Home Depot, and get you like a little petri dish, and you can stick those. They're like $15. You can stick those out in every little room, and then you can wait for a couple days. And if mold is growing on that, that tells you that the mold spores have gotten, like back when we were in elementary school, that you had the petri dish with the gel. The mold spores will be in there, and then they will start to grow. Then the second thing is, you may not have mold in your house. It might be a past exposure. You want to do a urine sample. This is the best way to check for mold, is through urine. And the reason why that is because if mold's in your body, it's in your blood. And then the blood filters out your kidneys, right? It filters out the water, like the excess urea and water. So in your urine, the mold spores can be 1,000 times more concentrated than the blood. So this is why you want to check the urine and not the blood when it comes to mold. All right, so with that being said, I appreciate you guys, and take care. Bye-bye.